All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our August HR Service Delivery Academy session. Today, we are going back to the basics and we are covering our HR Centers of Excellence data model. So in case this is your first Academy session and you don't know who I am, my name is Allison. I'm from our product team at ServiceNow, and I am the host for these series of Academy events on Community. I'm also joined today by two experts, Kyle and Michael, who will be helping with the Q&A. In terms of how we'll actually handle questions for today's session, if you do have a question at any point, please feel free to place that in the Zoom Q&A panel. Just a friendly reminder to please use that Q&A panel rather than the chat. This just helps keeps us organized and make sure that other users can also see your questions. In terms of our flow for today, we are going to start with some grounding information to make sure that everyone understands the COE data model. Then we'll go into some design and configuration considerations and also talk about security. Then we'll bring a lot of this to life by hopping into an instance and walking through some configuration and just some things to know about in an instance. Then we have a did you know section. So this will include some kind of fun facts about the COE data model that you might not be aware of today. And then lastly, we do have time reserved at the end for Q&A. And just to recap on how questions will work today, again, if you have a question, please put that in the Zoom Q&A panel, and Mike and or Kyle will be answering that in written format. But during this portion, I also have some frequently asked questions that I'd like to review with the group, and we'll also likely spend a couple of minutes talking through some of those questions that we received in written format, just live for everyone to hear. The other thing that I'll point out is if you are joining us from YouTube, also feel free to put those questions in the YouTube chat. So with that, let's dive into understanding the COE data model. And where I wanted to start for this is by defining what a COE is. And so if you look at the left of this slide, what I have here is actually the Gartner Human Resources Glossary definition of a COE. And so I'll go ahead and read that. So it says, a center of excellence, or COE, is a component of traditional HR operating models. COEs are a group of sub-functions within HR that use best practices to develop and support critical capabilities that align with the organizational priorities. So again, that's the Gartner Human Resources Glossary or dictionary definition of a COE. And I'm sure that many of you who are listening, who are either in HR or HR tech or the employee experience domain, are probably familiar with the concept of COE. It's probably very likely that you operate in this way already. You probably do have those different sub-functions or COEs within your operating model. If you look over to the right of this slide, we have this definition in the context of ServiceNow, HR service delivery, and our product specifically. So we like to say here that our COE data model really provides a structure for HR agents to organize their work by functional discipline. So what you'll notice here is, the two things that are similar across that Gartner Human Resources Glossary definition and our definition specific to our product is the fact that we're really accommodating for these sub-functional areas within an organization in HR. All right, next I want to talk through some quick facts about our COE data model. So first, if we look at the left of this slide, our COE data model was first introduced way back in our Istanbul release. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the fact that we name our family releases in alphabetical order after major city. Our next release is just around the corner. It'll be Rome. So we're on the R release. And this one goes back all the way to I or Istanbul. So it's been around for quite some time. And originally, this started as 7 COEs that we delivered as of the Kingston release, and it has since evolved to 14 COEs as of our Madrid release. And these counts that I'm giving are in addition to our core HR case table as well, which I'll talk about more in a moment. The other thing to point out in terms of a quick fact is the fact that our COE data model is really the foundation for many aspects of our HR service delivery product. So what this means is that we have a lot of core configurations and components that associate back to the COE data model, and we'll walk through some of what those things are today. The other thing that I would point out in terms of this being kind of the foundation for many aspects of the product is that each COE actually represents a table in ServiceNow. And so I know that a lot of you who are listening are probably pretty tech savvy and you're familiar with the overall architecture and you know what a table is. But I want to take a step back and just make sure that we define that, especially for anyone who is new to ServiceNow or isn't familiar with the architecture. So in terms of the basic architecture of the COE data model, the first thing to again reiterate is that the COE data model is essentially a set of tables. So what we're seeing over on the right of this slide is a listing of those COEs and their corresponding tables. So I won't read through all of them, but the other thing I want to point out, again, if you are newer to kind of the architecture, is what really is a table? What does that mean? So a table is a collection of records in the relational database that makes up ServiceNow. And sometimes I even like to say that you can think of a table almost similar to a spreadsheet. It's of course not a spreadsheet, but the reason that I say that is that each table has rows and columns. And so a column would contain a field and a row would contain a record. So just to kind of bring that to life, an example of maybe a column or a field could be, let's say, the actual HR service field. And an example of a row, of course, would be a specific record. So that would be a specific HR case record in this context. The other thing to point out about the basic architecture is that the COE tables, each COE table is an extension of the HR case table. So that's what we see in green over on the visual here. And you might be also asking yourself, what does it mean to extend a table? So extending a table essentially links the new table to it, and the new table inherits columns or fields directly. And so this can actually be thought of as a parent and child relationship. So as you can see here on the visual, I've added the fact that the HR case table can be considered parent class to all of those child COE tables. And again, those HR case tables can be considered child class. Another large component of the architecture to be aware of is the fact that the HR case table actually extends the task table. So if you don't already know what the task table is, it's one of the core tables that we provide in the base system. And so it contains fields used on each of the tables that extend it. And that actually makes the task table what we call base class. So it is a parent class, and it's not an extension of another table. And one thing I wanted to point out to kind of further bring this to life, under that what is the task table item over on the left of the slide, we say that it contains fields used on each of the tables that extend it. So one of those fields, just to again give an example, would be the assigned to field. That's actually something that's part of the task table that's used in all of those child class tables that we see here that are the COE tables. All right, so now that we have talked through some of the basic architecture, let's talk about the rest of the COE data model. So the COE is actually just one piece of the larger puzzle. So I'll use this pyramid visual to talk through the entire data model, and I'll start at the top, which will be a recap of what a COE is. So again, like what we've talked about, a COE is a center of excellence, and in our product, it indicates that broad domain of an HR case, and each COE is a table that is an extension of that core HR case table. So to give an example here, we do have an out-of-the-box payroll COE. If we look immediately beneath COE in this pyramid, we have topic category. So topic category is really that first layer of categorization beneath the COE. So sticking with that same example, an example topic category here could be payroll administration. Immediately beneath topic category, we have what we call topic detail. So this is really the second layer of categorization that's going a bit deeper. And sticking with the example of the payroll COE, the payroll administration topic category, an example topic detail here could be direct deposit. And immediately beneath that, we have ultimately the HR service. So the HR service is really the work or the service that your HR agents are performing on in service of your employees. So again, sticking with that same example, an example HR service could be here direct deposit inquiry. So the thing that I would point out about this is that as we go down that pyramid, we're getting more and more granular. The COE is kind of that overarching discipline as well within HR, and then the HR service again is that granular level of service or work that's being performed by HR. In addition to the data model itself, I have some other terms that I wanted to define, and those are across the bottom of the slide. So first on that additional terms list is HR case. So this is the record that is initiated when an employee has an HR need, and every HR case that's created would fall under the COE data model above. So HR cases would have a COE, a topic category, a topic detail, and an HR service. The next term on the list is catalog. So I like to say that a catalog is essentially similar to an online brochure because it's where employees or users can go to essentially browse and peruse what services they may need to request. Beneath catalog, we have record producer. So record producer is actually a type of a catalog item that displays as a self-service form to your employees. And then beneath record producer, we have what we call an HR template. So an HR template populates fields on an HR case when a request for a specific HR service is made. And once we get to our demo walkthrough, I'll actually pull up some example HR templates and we can take a look at what this specifically looks like in the platform. Now I want to talk about the benefits of the COE data model. So we've talked about what it encompasses, but let's talk about the why. So first and foremost, our COE data model gives each functional area flexibility to configure for their specific needs without having to worry about impacting the other areas. So the example that I like to give here is I'm sure that your payroll group would require different services, different fields, and different automation compared to, let's say, your talent management group. So again, the COE data model is what's providing that flexibility for each of those groups to configure according to their needs without, again, having to worry about impacting the other groups. The other thing to point out here is that this data model also helps ensure accurate categorization, assignment, and triage of your HR cases. So if we take a moment to consider what this might look like if we didn't have the COE data model and every HR case was not being classified, of course, it would be difficult to have a mechanism of categorization or taxonomy. It would be difficult to define assignment rules and kind of how that should flow. And also it would just make it difficult to triage cases. So this COE data model and framework really helps drive all of that. The other thing to mention is that the COE data model also helps drive data integrity. So if we specifically even think about this in the context of an HR agent, the HR services that are available for selection by an HR agent can be narrowed down and filtered by COE. So again, that just helps drive that data integrity. Another big thing to mention here is the fact that the COE data model also provides kind of a line of delineation for your metrics and reporting. So this, of course, allows you to slice and dice your data. So let's say you want to see something at the HR service, topic category, topic detail, or COE level. It makes it easy to do that with this model in place. And last, but definitely not least on the list, is the fact that the COE data model really provides a framework to limit access to sensitive cases. So as we know, the information within cases and within COEs can be sensitive. And so there are use cases and times when you need to restrict that. And so a little bit later in the presentation, we'll talk about the specific mechanisms that are available to do that. But this is really what enables that. Okay, now let's talk about design, configuration, and security. So first, we'll talk through some design considerations. And the first thing that I want to mention as a design consideration is to remember the fact that an HR service really represents the work that your agents are performing. So again, it's not just simply a broad category. We have the other aspects of the COE data model to help drive that. So again, we have the COE itself, the topic category, and the topic detail. So it's very important to, again, think of your HR service as the work that your agents are completing. The other thing to mention as a design consideration is to really consider to use what's delivered out of the box. So we actually deliver 57 out of the box HR services, and these can be used in a couple of different ways. One, you can use these HR services as inspiration for the specific requirements that you might have at your organization. You can also use these HR services directly. So let's say you have a use case that's really being kind of solved or fulfilled by one of these out-of-the-box services. You can tweak that and configure that according to your needs and go ahead and use that out-of-the-box service that exists. The other thing that I would mention about these 57 out-of-the-box HR services is that in addition to these 57, there are also HR services that are available via our employee experience packs, which are out on our ServiceNow store. The other thing to mention in terms of a design consideration is that this is definitely, again, one of those more foundational items of our product. And I recommend if you're in the earlier stages of designing what your HR services should look like to have some design workshops. And to enable those workshops and those conversations, we do have some very specific assets that I recommend. So we have a site called Now Create. It's actually embedded within our Now Learning site. And out there, we have a lot of really great resources. I've linked some specific resources here that I think would be helpful for people to consider as they're designing their COE data model. And so I have a process guide linked here, a process workshop presentation, and some actual product workbooks. And those product workbooks are actually Excel spreadsheets that are fillable by you to help you drive your intake process and your specific requirements for your HR services. And it really guides you along that process. So what we'll do is after this session, we will, of course, post the playback video of this session as we always do, but we'll also make sure that these links are very easily accessible to anyone who wants to use them. The other thing to mention as a design consideration is kind of a general rule of thumb. So with creative development, one HR service could do multiple things. But really, we like to give a general rule of thumb here is that when a majority of the items that we see across the bottom of the screen are varied, or even if 2 or 3 of these vary, really that's when we should be considering creating a separate HR service. So I'll just read through these items and add a little bit of context. So first on the list is, let's say the case creation methods vary. So let's say one of your HR services will be enabled to be, a self-service item where there is a record producer that an employee would fill out to open that, versus another one is really something that wouldn't be, self-service to employees and is something that your HR agents would open via phone conversation. The next item here is, let's say there is a difference in how tasks should be generated and created and the assignments. Or alternatively, let's say that there are different agent fulfillment instructions or checklists or knowledge articles that should be associated to the HR service. Or maybe there are different default values that you want to set on the HR case, such as the priority or the assignment group. Or you have, varying reporting requirements. Let's say you would like to see one thing at the HR service level versus another thing at the maybe topic category level. These are all kind of, again, general rules of thumb in terms of when it could make sense to create a separate HR service. Now let's talk about the high-level process for configuring an HR service. And the one thing that I would say about this is that there are multiple click paths in order to, create an HR service. All of the data that you would be completing and the fields that you would be completing are the same, but there are a couple of different paths to get here. And so I'll talk about the click path that I typically use and that I'll use in the demo here. And I also have a note across the bottom of the screen that I'll talk about in a moment as well. So where I typically start with this is I define the topic details and the topic categories that I would like to use for an HR service first. And the reason I do that is because this is something that's required to be set at that HR service level. So I find it convenient to have that already prepared when I go in to create and configure that new HR service. And so in terms of where you go to do that, in the left filter navigation, you would go to HR administration, HR services, and then either topic categories or topic details. From there, you would then be taken to what we see here in the screenshots on the left. So it's a simple list and form configuration process for maintaining your topic categories or topic details. Very easy to add. And once we get to our demo walkthrough, I'll just show an example of specifically what this looks like. Once you've done that, you're ready to create your HR service. And so what we see on the right-hand side of this slide is the HR service form that you would populate for creating a new service. And I have some slides that specifically hone in on some of these fields to be aware of and what they mean that we'll walk through in a moment. And again, we'll also walk through live the configuration of a new HR service in a little bit. In terms of actually navigating here, I do have the click path for this as well. So within HR administration and HR services, we do have HR service configuration. Now to kind of cover the note across the bottom of the screen, let's say you have an HR service that should be made available to your employees to request as a self-service item. You would need an accompanying record producer for this. So this is just the configuration of the HR service itself. And so this is kind of where that click path in terms of how you're configuring could vary. You get to the same result, but again, there are multiple click paths that you could follow. So you could actually, if you have an existing HR service, you could configure the record producer separately. And if you see the screenshot on the right, we actually see that record producer field. That's how you make that association. Or if you are configuring both of those at once, you could actually decide to create a new catalog item, AKA record producer from within HR administration, HR services, and manage HR catalog. And what this does is it would automatically create a corresponding HR service for you. So again, those are the high level steps. Once we get to the demo walkthrough, we will walk through this live with an example. The next thing I want to cover in the context of configuration is something called a fulfillment type. So this surfaces as a field on that HR service configuration form that we were just looking at. And this is one of those specific options that you can select. So you can select service activity. And really what this does is it helps you drive tasks, approvals, and child HR services. Again, the example that we configure, I'm actually going to configure that as a fulfillment type of service activity. So we'll see how this all comes to life, but wanted to specifically point this out. The other thing that you might be wondering, and I have kind of a small note across the bottom of this slide, is how this concept of service activity fulfillment type might be compared to lifecycle events. So the answer here is that you would want to use a lifecycle event for more advanced needs. So let's say you actually have conditions for when these items should be triggering. That is an indication that a lifecycle event would be a better fit. Next, we have case options. So on, again, that HR service configuration form, you have the ability to select multiple case options. And the configuration process for this is quite easy. These are common use cases that customers run into. And so the configuration is quite simple. We'll walk through what that looks like, but I want to walk you through what each of the selections means. So first on the list, we have add manager to watch list. So let's say you have a use case where you want to drive visibility and you want the manager of that subject person to be added to the watch list of the case. That is what would be enabled via that option. The next option, automatically create draft document. So let's say that you are presenting an employee with a document to sign. This would essentially automate the draft generation of that. Next, we have do not default subject person. So typically within an HR case, you would have an open for user and a subject person. Sometimes that might be the same person and sometimes it might be different. So the open for person would always be the person that the case is truly open for. So they're typically the person who is contacting. And the subject person could be the same as the open for user, but it could also be somebody else. So a simple use case here would be, sometimes the open for user could be a manager, and maybe the subject person is actually somebody on their team. Maybe they're opening a case on behalf of a team member, or maybe it relates back to a team member. So this option, of course, allows you to not default that to be the same person. Next on the list, we have skip auto assign. So let's say you would not like this HR service to be auto assigned. You can go ahead and apply this case option to remove that from that auto assignment. Next, we have skip automatic user acceptance state. So by default, your HR services, once they're closed out by an agent, would typically go into this automatic user acceptance state to really confirm back with the employee that their request or service has been fulfilled and they're good with that resolution. If you'd like to skip that, that is how you do that with this case option configuration. And then lastly, we have user cannot cancel. So let's say you would not like users to have the ability to cancel this HR service actually after it's already been opened or has been started to be processed. That is what can enable that. Next, we have a concept of what we call service table fields. So this allows you to really show or hide fields on the case form based on the HR service. So what this drives is it helps better tailor that HR case form to show what's relevant for agents for a given specific HR service. Next, we have subject person related lists. So this allows you to configure which related lists are shown when viewing a case. And so essentially what this does when you click that magnifying glass is it would list all of the tables that have data related back to the subject person and can be used as a reference to the case. And so when we go in and configure our HR service, we'll talk through a potential use case here for bringing in one of these related lists. Now let's spend a moment talking about security. So again, this is enabled by the COE Data Model, and there are kind of a couple of different paths for achieving different security requirements. The one I'll talk about first is COE security policies. So what this allows is it allows your HR admins to really use a simple list and form configuration process to create what's called an access control list, or ACL. And so this is really kind of a simplified configuration process for your admins. They can, select a COE, and they can determine if this applies to all HR services within the COE or specific services. They can also determine when this should apply, so they can set conditions, and then they can specify a type and then the group that this applies to. So again, this is really kind of that simplified configuration process for HR admins. In addition to the ability to create COE security policies using this simplified configuration process that we already talked about, if we look over to the right, we have the actual access control list rules themselves. So ACLs, or again, access control list rules, are really a platform feature that allows your admins to define requirements for users to meet, to view or interact with an object in ServiceNow. And so this is for maybe more advanced use cases where potentially even scripting may be required. This is what unlocks that capability and additional flexibility if you can't achieve what you need with the COE security policy configuration. The other thing to point out in the context of security is case restriction configuration. So in Paris, we actually released a new employee relations module. And within that new employee relations module that became available in Paris, employee relations admins have the ability to create a case restriction configuration. And what that would enable is essentially an HR agent would see a restrict button as they're working on a case. And what that would do is it would allow that case to be further locked down to a specified group. So again, that is specific to the employee relations module that we released in Paris, but it's still pertinent to mention as we talk about security overall, especially because we definitely understand that there are some unique security requirements specifically around your employee relations related use cases. All right, now what we will do is we will bring some of this to life and we will change over to the demo walkthrough. And to do that, I am going to switch my screen share over and bring up my instance. In just 1 minute, I need to log back in. Right, and I will resume screen share here. All right, so this is the instance that we will use for the demo walkthrough. The one thing that I'll mention about this instance is that I have done very little configuration. Essentially, I have requested this instance, I've installed plugins and installed demo data, and I think I've configured one HR template. Otherwise, everything that you see is, again, demo data that's installed with those plugins. So the first thing that I want to show you is how an admin would actually get to the list view of those COE tables that we talked about earlier when we were going over the basic architecture. So in the left filter navigation, if I just type in tables, I'm going to go to system definitions tables. Now what I'm going to do, so this is of course the list view of tables. I'm going to search for tables that begin with SN_HR core case. And as you can see, I have 14 results. So the first result here is that core HR case table that we talked about. So we can, of course, see what we reviewed earlier when we were talking about the basic architecture and the fact that this extends the task table. And the other results that we see here are all of those child class tables, the COE tables. So I won't read through all of them, of course, but you'll see everything that we talked about earlier in slide format represented here in this list view of the tables. The next thing I want to show is, let's say you are an HR admin. I want to show you where you would go to configure COEs according to the use cases of your organization. So again, going back to the left filter navigation, if I type in COE configuration, within HR administration, we have this COE configuration page. So this is a simple process of kind of toggling a COE on or off. You'll also notice that some of these COEs are turned on by default. These ones that are turned on by default are inclusive of those original COEs that were first delivered. And the ones that are not on by default are a lot of those ones that we released with the Madrid additions that we made. So again, this is a pretty simple toggle on or off process. And you'll see here also there is this note. So it says turning off one will disable HR services, topic details, categories, record producers, and modules related to that COE. So again, that is where you control that aspect. The other thing I want to show is I want to show you how easy it is to maintain those topic details and topic categories. So again, going back to the left filter navigation, if I just type in topic, within HR administration and HR services, we of course have both topic categories and topic details. So first I'll just click into topic categories. And what we see here is we see a list of 14 topic categories, and these are part of what's delivered with those 57 out-of-the-box HR services and that data model. So I can scroll through here. Again, I won't click through everything. And what I'm going to do is actually navigate to topic details next. For the HR service that we are going to configure, I'm going to use one of the existing topic categories. I'm going to use employee data management. So now if I go to topic details, similarly, I see the list view of all of the existing topic details that are delivered as part of those 57 HR services. There are 36. And I'm going to click new to create a new one for our HR service that we will be configuring. So let's say that our new topic detail is going to be relocation administration. So that is the name that I've decided on. And then we're prompted to select topic category. So again, this roots back to what we were just looking at. And like I mentioned, I'm going to use one of those existing categories of employee data management. So I'm going to submit that. And we will come back to using that in a moment when we configure our new HR service. But what I want to do before that is show you where you can look at those delivered HR services. So this is another one of those scenarios where there are multiple ways to navigate to see those HR services. But where I'm going to take us is within HR administration and HR services, we have HR service configuration. So if I click into that, here is the list view of, again, those 57 out-of-the-box HR services. So we don't have, of course, time to walk through all of these, but I do encourage you to take a look at these if you haven't already. And I will just click into this first option here as an example. So what I'll do is I'll walk through the different fields here and again, bring context to what each field drives before we actually go in and configure one of our HR services for the demo. So the first field that we see here is HR service name. So this is something that we type in as the name of the HR service. One interesting thing to note here is that whatever you type here in HR service name is automatically populating the next field, which is value. So this is the unique service value that is kind of populated in accordance, again, with what you're populating in HR service name. So when we create our HR service from scratch, we'll actually see that live in action. Next, we have badge. So as we can see here, this identifies the fulfiller group to the employee. So we ship 2, I believe, badges out of box as an example that can be modified as needed. HR and IT, I'm going to go ahead and leave this as HR. Then we have that fulfillment type field. So this is what we talked about earlier in the context of service activities. So this is how you define how this service will be fulfilled. So this is selected as manual. So that means this will be a manual fulfillment type, meaning the agent will kind of have this case assigned to them and they will manually work through that. There's nothing that's kind of being automated essentially. Then we have service activity. Again, to recap, this would be if we want to build a fulfillment process with tasks, approvals, and/or a child HR case. That's what we would select. And when we create our HR service in a moment, I will select service activity and we'll show what that configuration looks like. You also have the ability to use a workflow to fulfill this service. So I won't actually change this record, but let me show you what happens if you do select this. If you select workflow, you'll see this workflow field is populated. You'll also notice that on this form, it's actually read only. Just a tip, if you ever need to use this fulfillment type of workflow, that is something that you specify within the template for the HR service. You also have the ability to select a fulfillment type of lifecycle event to fulfill the service. There's also an advanced option. So this would be, let's say, a combination of workflow and service activity, and then ultimately a flow that you have built using Flow Designer. Again, I'm going to keep this as manual since that's what was selected. Then we have topic detail, and notice that this is actually one of the required fields on this form. And what happens here is once you select topic detail, it auto-populates topic category and COE for you. Again, that's part of that COE data model, and there is that relationship. So it knows, if you're selecting retirement, it means this is the topic category and this is the COE that applies to that. We also, of course, have a description for the HR service. As we can see here, it's just service for 401k retirement plan enrollment inquiry is what's populated. Then going back over here, we have a active checkbox. We also have a checkbox, again, to show the case to the subject person. I know we talked a little bit earlier about the concept of the subject person versus the open for user. So this is determining if you would like to show this case to that user. Then we have, again, the template. So like we talked about earlier, the template can help you specify field values. And this is, of course, something that's already been configured because it's part of that out-of-the-box set of 57 services. But let me open this template in another tab very quickly to just show you what it looks like. So as you can see with this template, we're specifying that this HR service should have, the HR skills of HR benefits populated, and we are setting the short description to 401k plan enrollment inquiry using this template. Now, if we go back, next after template is record producer. So again, this goes back to if you have a use case where this HR service should be something that an employee should be able to request via self-service, you will need that accompanying record producer to power that. So this is where you make that association and configure that. Next, we have those case options. I know we talked about all of the different case options that are available when we were in the slides, so I won't click into there, but when we configure our HR service, we'll select a couple of those. Next, you have the ability to specify HR criteria. So let's say that you want to define what HR services are available to a subject person specifically. You can use HR criteria here. The other thing to point out, and this is indicated here in what we see, is that if you have that situation where you do have an accompanying record producer, you would need to set that criteria at that level as well. Next, we have the ability to set views for open for and approvers, as well as subject person and task assignees. So there are default views that are available, and that's what's populated here. For the sake of time, I won't go deep into this today, but just know that if you do want to configure different views, that is something that is available as a configuration option. Next, we have case creation service configuration. So this is in the context of an HR agent opening a case. If they are on the create new case page, basically what you can do is configure that accordingly. So let's say there are specific fields that you would like them to be able to see and use. That is how you would configure that. And again, once we do our HR service as an example, we will create a sample case creation service configuration. Now, looking at the bottom of the slide, we have that HR service additional information tab here. So these are things that, again, we did talk about in slide format, but service table fields. So again, this is, let's say there's a use case to bring over fields that would be applicable for agents to see and use as they're working in a case. That's how you could configure that. And then again, this is how you configure those subject person related lists. So again, if there's data related to that subject person that would be helpful for agents to see, that's how you can configure that. We also see that there's a checklist tab. So let's say there are a defined list of steps or a checklist item that an agent should go through as they're working through this. That's something that you can add here as well. So now to further bring this to life, I will actually go in and create an HR service from scratch. So I'm going to go back to HR service configuration and click the new button. And for example, let's say that our HR service is going to be initiate relocation. And notice here again, I pointed this out earlier, but I have typed initiate relocation. And once I move my cursor out of there, you're going to notice that this value auto-populates. So we see that happening here. I'm going to go ahead and keep that badge selected to HR. Then we have the fulfillment type field. So we talked a lot about this field already. Like I mentioned, I'm going to use service activity because I'm going to want to trigger an approval and a task as a part of this. So I'm going to select that. And later, once I save this form, you're going to notice that there is a new service activity area that's populated on this form for me to actually configure those service activities. So we'll look at that in a few moments. Then we have the topic detail field. So again, we see that this is mandatory. And like I talked about earlier, once you select topic detail, it's going to automatically populate your topic category and COE. So I am going to use the topic detail that we created just a couple of minutes ago called relocation administration. And as I mentioned, we see the topic category and COE fields populated. The other thing to point out here, I don't know if you caught this, but when I selected the fulfillment type of service activity, this new field appeared, automatically close case. So this gives me the option to configure that I actually want this case to close once those service activities are complete. And you'll notice when I check this box, there are a couple of additional configuration fields that appear. So I can decide if I want to close this when all to-dos are complete versus when all mandatory to-dos are complete. Let's go ahead and close this when all of those to-dos are complete. And again, we'll look at this when we go back and use this HR service that we are creating. You'll also see that there are there's this close offset field. So let's say you actually want to offset the number of days until that case is closed. I'm going to keep this as 0, but let's say if you put 1, that would offset that by 1 day. Now going over here, I'm going to keep the active checkbox selected. I'm going to show this case to the subject person. I do want the employee who's being relocated to be able to see this case. Then we have template. So you'll notice right now, this is read-only. Once we save this form, this will be something that we can populate. Next, we have record producer. So again, if we had a use case to make this a self-service item that employees should be able to request from a portal, that's when we would need that record producer, and that's how we kind of associate that to this HR service. Then we have those case options, which we've talked about. I'm going to go ahead and click into here using the lookup list. And I am going to select, let's say, add manager to watch list applies here. I want the manager to be aware of this relocation. And let's also select that we want to skip that automatic user acceptance state. Let's say in this scenario, when we're just initiating that relocation transaction, we don't need confirmation back from the employee. I'm going to skip HR criteria. I'm not going to apply anything there. And I'm also going to apply the default views again for the open for and approver user, as well as the subject person and task assignee to save time. Next, we have that case creation service configuration. So I know I talked a moment ago about the use case for that. Again, if we have a need to bring over specific fields for agents to see as they're using that case creation screen, that's how we do so. So I am going to create a case creation service configuration by clicking new here. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And the first thing that we're prompted to do is to identify a name for this. So I'm going to name this relocation administration. And next, we're prompted to select a task table. So this, I'm going to select our HR workforce administration case table. And then we're prompted to select task fields that we want to appear to the agent on that case creation form or page. So on the left, let's say we actually have a lot of fields that are available to capture information about the relocation. I want the agent to see those and be able to use those. So I'm going to bring.
Hey, Allison. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
There's some comments in the chat that additional screen is not showing up. It's probably not sharing the additional window.
Oh, okay. Thank you for letting me know. Let me stop sharing and I can go ahead and change my share selection. Thank you for calling that out. Okay, let's try this again, and I will go ahead and share my entire desktop. Okay. So let me click back into that. So again, if I click here into case creation service config, I'm going to click here and I'll just stay on this page. Actually, okay, I'll restart. So let me restart with that. So the first thing I said, like I mentioned a moment ago, but I know you couldn't see this screen, is that we have to pick a name for this. So the name that I was picking was relocation administration. And then we pick the table. So I'm going to pick HR workforce administration case. And then we are prompted to pick which fields should appear on the left, right, and the bottom. So like I was mentioning, we do have some fields that are available that capture information about relocations. And so I want the agent to be able to use those and see those. So I am going to select those here from this picker and bring those over so that the agent can see those on the left area. Let's also say that on the right, I want them to be able to use subject, person, and open for fields. So I'm going to populate those. And then across the bottom, let's say that I want, of course, the agent to be able to begin taking notes. Let's say that this is happening via a phone call and the agent needs to start taking work notes around this relocation. I'm going to add that to the bottom. So now I'm going to submit that. And that has been saved here on this form. And once we get through the rest of the configuration, I will create this HR service and we'll see this come into play when we're able to see those fields. Now across the bottom under HR service additional information, let's say we do have a couple of items that we want to bring over here. Let's again just bring over some of those relocation items. Oops, scroll. There we are. And then again, we have the ability to configure some subject person related lists. So just for simplicity, I am going to say that in this situation, it might be helpful for us to see the health benefits of the subject person. Let's say perhaps that is potentially impacted by a relocation. So now I'm going to save that. And now let's configure our service activities. So I'm going to click new here. And first, like I said, I want to generate an approval. On the left, we'll notice that once we select approval, we can configure how that approval should behave. And again, for the sake of time, I won't walk through all of those, but know that there are several configurations available for that. You'll also notice that you can configure the order. I'm going to keep this as 1 because I want this to trigger first. And we can also decide who should be the approver or approvers for this. So in this scenario, I want the subject person's manager to actually approve this relocation before it's processed. So I am going to go ahead and select that here. I'm going to save this service activity. So that was the first service activity that I wanted to create. Now let's create another one. Let's say after that has been approved by that subject person's manager, I actually want a task to trigger. Let's say in this specific scenario, this transaction is something that's specialized and I need this to go out to another group, maybe let's say tier 3, to complete that transaction. So what I am going to do here is I have pre-configured again to save time a template here of process relocation transaction that we'll use. And I'll just show you very quickly what I've populated in there just so that is clear. So as you can see in this template, I have said that this short description should be process relocation and I have specified some field values. I've also specified that this needs to go to that tier 2 assignment group because again, this transaction is something that is specialized and needs to sit with them. And for this one, I'm going to change the order to 2 because I want this to trigger after that approval that's going to the subject person's manager. All right, so now we have configured our HR service and we have configured those 2 service activities. So we see both that approval and that task here. Now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I am going to, let's open that HR service. So I'm going to go to that create new case page and let's open this service for Able. I know Able has a manager populated in my demo data. So what I'm going to do, there are a couple of options here. So first, let's say an agent wanted to start with COE. If they start typing in the COE name, what this will do is actually filter this HR service list for them. So now they only see HR services that fall under that COE that they have selected. Alternatively, if they also decide to go in and select HR service first, that would auto-populate COE for them. So let's select that initiate relocation service that we just created. And you'll also notice that those fields that we just created as part of that case creation configuration are now appearing here. So again, the use case is that if the agent wants to start populating any of this information as they're intaking the case, they can go ahead and do that. So let's create the case. And one of the things that I'll point out here, you'll notice that I need to actually save a short description here. This is something that I could have set using that template when I created the HR service. I didn't configure that, so we'll just go ahead and say relocation for Able tutor. And I'm going to say that this is ready for work. So this was auto-assigned to Suzette. We didn't, remove this from that auto-assign process. So it has been assigned to Suzette, who sits in our HR Tier 1 group. The other thing I'm going to show you, let me reload this form. Now that we've reloaded this, we see that this state has gone into awaiting approval. And it's actually because of that first service activity that we configured. If you remember, we wanted that service activity to trigger to the subject person manager. So if we go down here to the related list in approvers, we can actually see that this approval record has been created. Alejandra is Able's manager, and so that approval has triggered to her. Now, to save time, I'm not going to go through and impersonate Alejandra and go to the Employee Service Center to do area to approve this. I am in as admin, so I'm just going to approve this to move us along in our demo. But again, typically Alejandra, the manager, would go ahead and approve that herself. So now that this has been approved, we can see some additional activities. So we see that this case is approved, and we see something was assigned to Reina. So if we scroll down here, we can actually see now that we have gotten through that first service activity, we actually have an HR task that has been created. So that was the second HR service activity that we configured. So I'm going to click into here. And actually, you know what? For this, let me impersonate Raina quickly. Go to her HR tasks. And her assigned tasks. And we see that task as Raina. So let's say Raina has started the work. She's gotten the information about the relocation and is processing that in, let's say, another system. And she has completed that transaction. So now let's say she is going to close complete this task. Transaction completed. So now we see that this task has moved to close complete. Also show you, this is the parent case. So this is the case that we initially opened for Able. We can still see that this is actually in ready state still. If you remember, when we were configuring this HR service, we did select that box to actually auto close this case. I'm going back to system admin. Let me actually show you what controls that. There's actually a scheduled job that runs to close those. So it is called auto close case. So if we click into here, we can see that by default, this is actually running on a daily basis, but I'm going to go ahead and execute that now. And then once this executes, if we go back to all of our HR cases, we actually see now here that that case has been moved to close complete, again, because we configured that to auto close once those service activities were closed out. So that was it for the live walkthrough. Now let me go back into our slides, and we have a couple of additional items that I wanted to walk through. So the next item is the did you know section. So again, these are just some of those facts about the COE data model that you might not be aware of that would be good to have in the back of your mind. So first on the list is that in addition to those COE tables that we talked about earlier, those COEs have columns or fields that are good for you to know about. And these can be used to capture additional information. So we saw some examples of that when we were in configuring those sample HR services, but just to give a couple more examples here, let's say if we look at our HRIT operations COE table, we have fields like HR system, report type, and report frequency. And within our HR workforce optimization COE table, we have fields like employee change date and relocation reason. Again, we saw some examples of that when we were configuring. The other thing to point out here is that, of course, this is what is delivered, but HR admins can add columns or fields to HR COE tables as needed. Of course, each organization may have their specific requirements, and so just wanted to point out that that is something that can be added and configured. The next thing to point out here is the fact that in addition to all of those core kind of COE tables that we talked about earlier, there are additional tables to be aware of. And those tables kind of fall across three different types. So the first type here is profile tables. So these are tables that contain information relevant to an employee and include a reference back to the employee. So an example here would be the health benefits table. So this would actually include information on the employee as well as health benefits. The other type of table here are subject tables. So this would actually contain information maybe used to maintain your programs or your plans or policies. And it may be, these types of tables may be referenced by a profile or by case tables. So an example of a subject type table would be HR benefit plans. Next on the list, we have lookup tables. So these actually store a name and a value that is a pair for a list of variables that can be selected as part of a dropdown. So another example of this type of table would be cost center. Next on the list, what happens if an HR case is opened under the incorrect HR service? So cases can be reclassified or transferred from one HR service to another. And actually going back to our New York release, we had a major enhancement that became available to allow customers to configure and use different transfer types according to preference. So the two options are standard and reclassify. Standard was what was available before New York. And so essentially this gives some details here on the slide in terms of the behavior there. The HR case number would actually change when transferring an HR case from one service to another. And you can also see some details written out there about the links and the work notes. What became new is reclassify. So this actually allows you to not change that case number. You're keeping that consistent. You're also redirecting links and you're copying work notes. So just wanted to point out that these two items were available and the kind of history around that in terms of the New York release. The other kind of did you know fact that I wanted to highlight here is the fact that you can actually use predictive intelligence to make an HR service prediction. So predictive intelligence is one of our platform capabilities that allows you to use machine learning. And specifically for our HR service delivery professional and above customers, we have some delivered solutions. One of those delivered solutions is called HR case classification. And so what this actually is doing is it would look at the short description of an HR case, and using your historical case data, there would be a machine learning algorithm that has been trained to actually make a prediction using that information. And so the way this would surface, let's just use an example here. Let's say an employee goes out to your portal. This is a self-service HR service, and they accidentally select the wrong HR service. What would happen is that would be created, and when an agent views that, they would be able to see that blue banner info message that we see in the screenshots on the right to let them know, hey, according to this machine learning algorithm, there is actually a different predicted HR service for this HR case, and it gives them the option to transfer accordingly. All right, so now we have time for Q&A. I haven't been reading all of the Q&A. I've seen some pop-ups. It looks like Mike and Kyle have been busy answering questions in written format. I also want to kind of walk through some FAQs, but I have been talking a lot, so I want to pause and turn to Mike and Kyle to see if there's anything that we should discuss live that's come in via the chat.
Well, you have it covered here. So one that I selected to answer live was that can we create a new COE? And I knew it was a question, so I just waited to answer that. When we just got a new question is, what is the reason to use a case creation service configuration?
Yes. So first I'll answer the COE question just to read it out loud, and then we'll talk about the case creation configuration. So the answer around can you create a new COE? So the answer is that this should really rarely need to take place because the structure and flexibility that we provide out of the box. So you should be able to use the existing COE table structure and then that flexible data model that we offer that we were talking about earlier. So the topic categories, topic details, and HR services. The other thing to note is if you do need to, for some reason, go down that path of creating a custom or new COE, is that will have potentially licensing implications in terms of your custom table consumption. So that's the first answer. The second answer around the use case for creating a case creation configuration. Again, this goes back to that agent persona. So let's just pretend that there is a phone call that your agent is taking, and they need to start, referencing information on that topic, and they need to start taking notes. Depending on the HR service that they are intaking, their needs might vary. And so that example that we configured earlier around relocation, we wanted to bring over those relocation fields available to the agent to, again, just make that more intuitive and easier for them so they have the right information at their disposal. So hopefully that was helpful. We have a couple of other frequently asked questions that I will walk through as well. So the next one is, can I just use the core HR case COE? So the answer here is that it is recommended to actually use those COEs that extend the core HR case table for any areas that your HR team provides service. Again, this goes back to those benefits of the COE data model. To make sure that you get those benefits, you do need to, of course, use those COE tables and not just stick to that core case table. And the other thing that I wanted to very specifically call out is, can I change my HR service design over time? So the answer here is absolutely yes. Just note that there should be kind of a cutover process if this actually includes deactivating an existing HR service that you have in place. So as part of that cutover, just be sure to close out any existing open cases that you have under that HR service before you actually go through with that cutover and deactivation. So I know we're right about at time. We just have 2 minutes left. I want to check back in, Mike and Kyle, anything else that's come in that we should actually talk about live, or are we covered in written format?
No more questions through the Q&A.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We will be back next month with our next Academy session. Hopefully this was helpful, and that is a wrap.